Hello, my name is Walter Davis. I'm with the Citizens Internet Television Network and the San Diego County Times, and I have the pleasure to be with Don Hall today. Don is a author, an environmentalist, an activist from New Orleans. And Don, tell me something about yourself. Tell me what you want to convey to the public today.
All right, I think it would be good to start with New Orleans because New Orleans is so central to the future of the United States and to the world here in October of 2008, this very crucial year where we see so much coming together that both threatens and empowers us. You know, that we're able to do this kind of interview is one example of technology that is empowering us. But to go to New Orleans, I moved to New Orleans in January 2006, about 4 months after the flood, in order to help with recovery through an organization called Common Ground Relief that a friend of mine, Malik Rahim, had begun, co-founded. And I immediately bought a house and have lived there since. I was drawn to New Orleans because I felt that its culture, its mix of races, and the kind of creativity it spawns, and everything about its roots were kind of crucial to perpetuating a United States that we worth living in.
So you mentioned October and this crucial time. I mean, obviously this is the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina hitting. We're having a crucial financial crisis right now in this country. We have the elections coming up, and you talked about race issues. That's quite a lot. You've got quite a lot in that little encapsulation there.
Yes, so I guess we should try to get specific through New Orleans. What I think New Orleans stands for now in 2008, over 3 years after the flood that really wrecked the city. It wasn't the hurricane. It actually survived the hurricane. It was the breaching of the levees, the overtopping of the levees that drowned the city. You see all over the city, among black people, brown people, white people, recovery going on through individual and community efforts to unite it. You know, despite unimaginable obstructions, African American families in the upper and lower ninth wards have been able to return and are rebuilding. And they're aided by tens of thousands of people from across the country and around the world who have come to New Orleans to make sure that those who wish to return have the ability to return. But this has all been despite a lot of deliberate frustration from all the established powers, from the federal, state, city governments not providing the support that they should, and in fact trying to seize or demolish people's homes. It's still rampant in certain wards of New Orleans.
The deliberate frustration. So you're saying that entities among the local and the federal government are purposely impeding people?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's no different now than it was during the horror show of the week following the flood. I mean, you remember the images of people stuck outside the convention center and the Superdome. As an aside, I'd like to recommend a movie called Trouble the Water. It's a documentary about a couple from the Upper Ninth Ward who survived, and she took a lot of raw footage that is incredibly compelling about how they had to fend for themselves. So as I was saying, the situation for people who wish to return to the Lower Ninth Ward is an instance. It was 11 months before the Lower Ninth Ward had water and electricity. It was till July 2006. Early in 2006, the city of New Orleans was threatening just to bulldoze whole blocks. And that was one of the more shining moments of common ground. Activists who were there before me came and basically put their bodies in front of the bulldozers. It was something that's very little reported, but that's what happened.
Could I focus on that one issue before we move forward with this? Now, what do they have to gain by taking people's property? Is this what's happening?
Yes, that's exactly what's happening, and it's being done in sweeping ways. For instance, last December, the City Council of New Orleans voted unanimously to demolish 4 public housing projects, 2 of which were on the historical register as being, architecturally valuable, and were, seed beds for generations of families and activists. They'd been, of course, hit by the heroin influx and the crack influx, and they'd become much less hospitable, but they still meant a lot, and they were perfectly viable as bases from which people who wanted to return to the city to stay. In fact, 2 of them, Lafitte and St. Bernard, suffered almost no damage. They got maybe 3 or 4 inches of water. They're perfectly habitable. But the city stalled the reoccupation year after year, and then finally the city council voted last December to simply demolish them. So these beautiful, many of them, buildings were put under the wrecking ball, and they're all gone now. So that was 4,534 apartments, which would have housed about 4 or 5 times that number. We could have brought 20,000 people back to New Orleans just through those units. So that's one instance of the sweeping state abilities, because that was a partnership between HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and the City of New Orleans, and the Catholic Church. Catholic Charities was the main instrument insisting on the demolition of the most notable of the public housing developments, Lafitte, which coincidentally sits just a half mile from the French Quarter, extremely valuable real estate, which is now going to be a development supposedly with affordable housing in partnership with Providence Community Housing and Enterprise Community Housing, 2 of those big corporations that specialize in doing developments for which they don't have to pay, that are supposedly going to benefit low-income people that very seldom do. So there's all that, and then there's house by house through the lower ninth and church by church where they will come and just say you haven't cut the lawn and you have 30 days and the building is going to be demolished. And the other main element of all this is there is a deliberate blockage of communication between residents and owners of property. It's let me give you an instance. When we were fighting this battle over public housing last winter, I became allied with preservationists, people who were concerned about the architectural value of the buildings and so forth. So I kind of had access to upper-class white liberal circles, and they hired an attorney who's the son of the architect who is the architect of record for the Make It Right project in the Lower Ninth, John Williams, his son. All those credentials went to the New Orleans Housing Authority and requested information about the whereabouts and the phone numbers and so forth for residents who were displaced. We couldn't get it.
So the Make It Right project is something sponsored by Brad Pitt, correct?
He's been very helpful, and he's a busy person with 6 kids and a career and so forth. But he has been present. He was there last December, many days, and he's pitched it, and he's helped to make it happen. But here is another instance. Their intention is to build 150 houses. They've managed to complete 6, and they got, in the first 2 or so months, they got close to $13 million in donations. Another instance of people across the country and around the world contributing to try to bring people back to New Orleans. But with all that revenue and all that clout, all that platform, they've only been able to do 6 houses. So again, an indication of all obstruction.
That's ridiculous. They got $13 million.
Yeah.
They had the influence of a major Hollywood power,
Right.
and because of obstruction from the government, they only have 6 houses built in how many years?
Well, let's
3 years?
let's say make it right. Brad moved to make it right in about this fall of 2006, and then they were working it out. They've done everything right. They've gone to community meetings. They've asked people what kind of housing they wanted. They've tried to find out what the community's desires are, and the houses that they've put up, the 6, are exemplary. I built a house my second year with Freebuild Green, and it was meant to be sustainable and have renewable energy features. It's skip housing, structural concrete integrated panels. So you use recycled styrofoam and you shoot it with concrete and so forth. And that house, which is the first house of its kind in the Upper Ninth Ward, is almost done. But to go back to make it right, they have the same kind of intention. They're not doing skip housing per se, but they are using recycled materials, and it's supposed to be sustainable, and it's loaded with renewable energy features.
Now, I went through the Lower Ninth Ward last December. I rented a cab and I drove through, and I
So you saw the pink houses?
I saw the pink houses.
Yeah.
I have a broadcast on internet television. It's called The Aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Now, one of the things and I want to get back to what you were saying, but I have a question on this. I was told that they're rebuilding these homes in the Lower Ninth Ward on land that's contaminated, and that abatement procedures hadn't really been observed, and that, in other words, this land had contamination from World War II military basis operations, and that they're actually building these homes back on contaminated property. Is there any truth to that?
What I can say about New Orleans and Louisiana in general is it's thoroughly contaminated, but it doesn't seem to bother anyone, and I don't know what to ascribe it to, but that's way down the
List of priorities?
Yeah, even the things that people even notice or feel or are aware of. The awareness of environmental pollution is it's so thoroughgoing that, and you're right about the landscape of New Orleans. There was no effort whatsoever to really cleanse the streets or the houses of that water that came in and sat for weeks, and that water was loaded with all kinds of chemicals. In New Orleans, that the Mississippi River crosses right through it. Cancer Alley is 70, 80 miles of refineries, etc., is between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And you've got all that, and then you've got the oil and gas with 10,000 miles of channels and what was wetlands between the Gulf and the city. So that's the kind of water that sat in the city. So I don't think there was any serious effort even to measure the amount of pollution.
So the amount of pollution was devastating even before the hurricane.
Yes.
And you said Cancer Alley?
Yeah.
Why is it called that?
I think because the carcinogens produce a lot of cancer.
There's a high rate of cancer in those parishes.
Yes. But the central reality I want to convey is the hopeful reality that people, despite all these kinds of obstacles, have returned and their culture remains vibrant. Somebody just sent me today, and I will forward it to you, perhaps want to use it in this program, but it's Charmaine Neville of the Neville musical family. Does a fish fry every Friday evening in the Lower Ninth Ward. Folks just come and talk, and it's New Orleans culture. You come and eat and talk and socialize and so forth. So that was what this video was about.
Okay. So you said that you are an author. Did you want to talk some about your book at all, or?
Well, I'd like to try to New Orleans is still in crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd like to spend a few minutes relating what the overall vulnerability of the city is,
Mm-hmm.
which was revealed almost on the anniversary this past August.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that you saw on the national news that Hurricane Gustav
Mm-hmm.
was bearing down on New Orleans.
Right.
And it appeared that it was going to wipe it out. It appeared it was going to be a landfall of a Category 3, that is over 135-mile-an-hour winds. And what happened in the last 36 hours is it veered to the west, and the city escaped the brunt of it.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed on the West Bank. I was going to leave on Saturday night when it looked like it was going to be that size of a hurricane. It didn't seem like it made any sense to stay. But once it began to diminish its prospects, my housemate and I decided to stay, live on the West Bank, just across the Mississippi River Bridge in Algiers, Gretna border. So anyway, the storm as it hit New Orleans was a tropical storm. It had winds at a height of 69 miles per hour, and the storm surge coming up the Intracoastal Waterway and the Mistergo was only about 9 feet. But even so, even with that relatively light wind and modest storm surge, the walls of the Industrial Canal, and you know the Industrial Canal because it separates the lower and the upper Ninth Wards,
Mm-hmm.
overtopped, both going to the upper Ninth and going to the lower Ninth. For 3 hours it overtopped, going to the upper Ninth. So we were sitting at home, the hurricane mostly passed, and watching the waves. It was kind of like a waterfall, just cascading over this relatively flimsy wall that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had put up. If the hurricane had hit as even a 1 or a 2, 110 miles an hour, the storm surge would have been more like 15 to 20 feet, which would have meant those walls would have overtopped 6 to 10 feet, which would have meant the upper and lower Ninth Wards would again be inundated. So the reason I want to convey this to the public is that, well, immediately after that we formed a group called Levees, Wetlands, Jobs, and the intentions of that group are to move in every way possible to assure that by the next hurricane season levees are built up to a height of 25 feet. They're right now at a height of 17, 18, which is where they were before Katrina. And they've actually subsided a little, so they're really not that. They're actually lesser protection than they were. So our first position about levees and walls is they need to be 25 feet high for the city to have a viable chance of surviving hurricanes. And wetlands, we advocate the planting of 100 million cypress trees, or it's called spiragrass, the little plants put in. And that seems like an outlandish amount, 100 million plants or trees, but if you get volunteers out there, they're put in every 6 inches, and a volunteer in good terrain can do 500 to 1,000 each. So that would add up. And we know we've got the resources in terms of volunteers. The first year of Common Ground, we had over 13,000 volunteers, and we got it over 2,800 houses. So the people are willing and ready. We just have to get enough government support to affect that. And then the other element is the jobs, and that is 50,000 jobs for residents of Louisiana, past or present, who want to return to work.
What is the benefit of planting these shrubs and trees in this area?
Well, it restores the wetlands. The wetlands served as a buffer for centuries for New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans was very intelligently placed. It was 80 miles upriver from the Gulf. The French knew there were hurricanes and so forth. But at that time, the bayou was incredibly dense with vegetation. And all that pretty much has been removed by the oil and gas industry. He said there are 10,000 miles of canals and other channels down there. And then the Gulf itself is eroded almost 30 miles in the 20th century. It's 30 miles closer to New Orleans than it was, say, in year 1900.
So the ecological balance in New Orleans has been disturbed, and so that contributes to the vulnerability to the hurricane.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you wouldn't need the levees and the walls at that height if there were, miles and miles of cypress trees that were themselves 20 or 30 feet high, at least, were absorbing that wind.
So the technology obviously exists. When we look at places like the Netherlands and Holland, they have dikes that keep the sea back. So obviously the technology exists.
Yeah.
And our government is aware of that.
Right. Yeah. Well, you see what's obvious, and it makes you wonder what the intention is. It gets into a perspective that, for me, based on my research and writing about the actualities of September 11th, 2001, which I think bear a lot on both New Orleans' circumstance and the U.S. public's vulnerability to the financial interests, which are basically ripping up all our protections the way that Louisiana's protections were ripped up, and all at the service of this completely illusory speculative economy of better debtor corporations. But to get back to why this can be, why aren't the obvious remedies being affected? You recall certain things that were said immediately after the flooding of New Orleans, like Richard Baker's saying that, the hurricanes did what we've been trying to do for 20 years, get the poor people out of New Orleans. So there's a lot, as you know, coming from Birmingham, Alabama. There's a lot of racism at the root of all relationships in the South and all relationships in the United States. So there's that, and then there's more occult kind of reasons. I think the city of New Orleans is very important to those who think they should own America, and that it has been nominally controlled by African Americans for about 30 years. There's been a black mayor of New Orleans for about 30 years. I think that kind of rubs certain people the wrong way, their wrong way. And there's the freedom. I think maybe the most central thing, race aside, is the freedom and the creativity that is still so much a part of the gestalt in New Orleans. I mean, people are easier there, and there's much less of a corporatist channeling of you from one place to another, which you can see all over California now. It's really difficult for me to return to the San Francisco Bay Area because it's all been paved over, and you basically feel like a can along the line when you're at the San Francisco airport. But New Orleans is not like that. There's still a lot of ease and communication, people who are genuinely interested in each other and have a culture that supports that.
So some of this could also, one of the things I didn't hear you touch on is a class warfare.
Oh, it's definitely that. And it's kind of, to stay on New Orleans again, because it's so representative, I haven't seen the plans, but I've heard there are plans of a New Orleans that is, roughly $250,000 and exists kind of like a theme park. Kind of like the lower ninth ward would be Marina del Rey, it would be underwater, but travel in and out. And, there'll be the jazz. People come for their jazz. And there'll be the food and so forth. And there'll be a servant class. And then there'll be the tourist class. And then there'll be the exploitative class. An interesting thing about New Orleans, and it's true of Oakland as well, which has a lot of parallels to New Orleans, is that the city doesn't receive a cent of revenue from the port. If New Orleans had the monies from its port, everything could be solved.
Where does the money from the port go?
It goes to the rich landed gentry that controlled Louisiana for centuries.
So I'm hearing exploitation, I'm hearing environmental ignorance, I'm hearing class warfare, I'm hearing racism.
You're hearing a lot of hard things, but I mean, you've been to New Orleans, and you know it's not like that. I mean, those are realities that are being wielded against the culture of New Orleans. Yeah, and the culture of New Orleans. I mean, not to get all starry-eyed about it. I mean, there are a lot of internal intrinsic problems within. I mean, blacks have been doing it to blacks in New Orleans for a long time. I mean, there's been those 30 years of black mayors, and there's been an enormous deterioration in the quality of working class happening in American life. So it's not about one race is going to save the day. It's going to be people managing to affect their culture into the governance of their society, which is one of the reasons I'm here in San Diego for familial reasons, but also to reconnect with San Diegans for 9/11 Truth and to try to start what we call Victory Garden, along with an information center to find a piece of land. And I think that kind of coincides with what you're doing with the Community Coalition. Earlier this year, 2008, this very kind of crucial year, friends called me about an effort by the state of California to spray 10 counties in the Bay Area and the Central Coast, supposedly to eradicate the light brown apple moth, which is this little quarter-inch wide insect that has, coexisted with flora in New Zealand and Hawaii for decades without any real problem. But anyway, the state CDFA, at the behest of the USDA, had sprayed Santa Cruz and Monterey counties in September, October, November of 2007, and there were 643 reported illnesses from that. And they didn't really kill the moths, and it's impossible to kill the moths to eradicate the moths. So it was pretty clear to me that this was just a pretext for conditioning people to accept aerial spraying. And they were going to spray San Francisco, they were going to spray Marin County, they were going to spray, unlikely habitats for the light brown apple moth. So this was, and we did long upshot of this was that I connected with some old friends at Organic Valley Family Farms, and we put out this 4-pager that you can read on the Organic Consumers Association website. And it's an overview of what's happening. It's called, I guess we can show some things now. We should show. It's called Local Controls and Organic Solutions, and begins on the first page with an overview of what the situation is, how it's so important for us to engage in cooperative solutions in an age of crises, because it details all the weather changes that we're undergoing. And then the second page is about the resistance to the Alban spraying in Santa Cruz, Monterey, San Francisco, Marin, and so forth. And that was a successful resistance. There were thousands of people who marched and otherwise made their views felt, and media came along. They saw how wrong the whole intention was. And that third page is, again, an overview of how a few corporations control to incredible degrees the pesticides and the seed supplies of the whole world. Monsanto, Cargill, and German corporation whose name escapes me have over 80 or 90% of each of those. So the battle is basically between maintaining a base of food that is not genetically engineered or succumbing to it. So, hence the title. And then the back page is all about the growth of organic farming and the number of organic consumers there are. There are over 90,000 members of the Organic Consumers Association in California alone. So it's a tremendous potential force.
So you mean that our government is actually spraying chemicals on our cities without people's permission or knowledge?
Well, it has been for a long time. You know, one instance leaps to mind, and that was in 1951. They sprayed the San Francisco Bay Area to kind of test something, let's say. And what resulted was a lot of people getting polio at a time when polio was not treatable. And you know about the Tuskegee experiments.
Tuskegee?
Tuskegee experiments, yes. So it's another video that came to me over the internet today to talk about our mutual means of empowering each other in communication. It had to do with a friend in Houston. You know, I sometimes am invited to cities to talk about 9/11. There's this DVD that Jim Hoffman and I did, 9/11 Guilt, and a couple of books that are now sold out, but we will bring out one book to include them shortly. Anyway, a fellow in Houston, whom I met through Houston 9/11 Truth, went to the Bonnaroo Music Festival in Tennessee, huge festival, hundreds of thousands of people attend, with stickers saying 9/11 is an inside job. So large part of his video is hundreds of people showing him stickers, you know, at the festival. And that's pleasant to see. But the second half of the video is about chemtrails, because it was very evident in the sky above Bonnaroo that the sky had been dosed by chemtrails. You know, it was a white sky instead of a blue sky.
And it's so hard for a lot of people to believe that our own government would manipulate information in a way to mislead the public. And so a lot of our foreign policy has been governed by what happened on 9/11. And wars make money for corporate, military, and industrial complex. They make a lot of money for people. We're spending $10 billion, $8 billion a month in Iraq. And so...
Yep. I could not agree more. To jump to my work with 9/11 kind of relates to working with disadvantage, being in a situation in which you're basically working with people who have long been disadvantaged in the United States. But I was writing a column for a newspaper in San Francisco Baby, a weekly paper that had an audience of about 25,000 copies a week. And I had a column due on the Wednesday after 9/11. So of course I wrote about it. And at first, being on the Pacific Coast and not getting any news till about midday that day, I believed that Muslim hijackers actually had suicided themselves and so forth. The next day, I saw the timeline and saw the 34-minute gap between the second hit to a twin tower and the hit to the Pentagon, and immediately a huge red flag went up. How could it be that the Pentagon was not defended with that much advance warning? So that was my lead into investigating 9/11, which has produced 3 books. This first one, this is the only copy that I have, called 9/11 Facing Our Fascist State. Then a book that I did with researcher Jim Hoffman called Waking Up from Our Nightmare. Pictorial book, the first half of which deals with evidence proving controlled demolition of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. And then the sections that I primarily wrote or did write are called the financiers behind 9/11 and cooperative solutions. So what I had learned over 2-3 years of pretty concerted research was that yes, there was all these gains to the industries you just mentioned. We won't be able to show them here, but these are graphs we did in Waking Up From a Nightmare about the oil companies and the weapons manufacturers and the gains that they had in the years immediately after September 11th, 2001. But beyond that, and not even mentioning the heroin traffic that originates from opium grown in Afghanistan, which is itself a $180 billion industry that makes for a multiple of about 20 times that when the narcotics profits are laundered through financial institutions. You know, it's actually the biggest business in the world, short of all that speculative capital. It's the biggest product business in the world, opium from Afghanistan.
So my understanding is that the Taliban was actually eradicating the opium fields, which is why they were attacked.
I think that's the essential reason. You know, I think that was the biggest economic reason. There's, I think, a graph on that too, showing it's a United Nations graph, and what it shows is, you know, in the 10 years prior to 2001, and we should make clear too that the United States intelligence operation is responsible for the opium growth in Afghanistan. That's a legacy of the war that was started by Zbigniew Brzezinski, and the chief operative for that promotion of opium crops in Afghanistan was a fellow named Richard Armitage, who was Colin Powell's main lieutenant in the first George Bush administration. So, anyway, UN charts show steady 2,500, 3,000 or so metric tons per year. In 2001, the Taliban went on the attack, and basically the only opium that was grown in Afghanistan was grown by the so-called Northern Coalition outside the Taliban's reach. So it diminished from about 3,500 metric tons to 181 metric tons. And what that meant was a loss of $180 billion to the world's illegal economy, of which only $3 billion actually stayed in Afghanistan or nearby. You know, that's all that the actual growers and the labs made there. The rest of it was made in the major cities of the Western world. But all that money, that $180 billion, has to be laundered somehow. And what happens is it goes through the Chase Bank or Citibank or Barclays Bank and so forth, or it shows up in the bottom lines of DuPont, so on and so forth. And anyone who's taking this in can go on the internet and just Google those words, money laundering, narcotics traffic, corporations, and you'll see several articles that will detail the story. But even beyond the the dope traffic, the chain of dope, as it's called in Waking Up From a Nightmare, I think the major economic reason for 9/11 had to do with the financial system that is now imploding on us. At that time, needing a false flag incident in order to create a war and distract people from its enormous liabilities and to make money. And what I had not learned in the depth that I later learned, as there was a book subsequent to this called To Prevent the Next 9/11, Against the New World Order of Financiers, Corporate State, is that speculators who base their riches on a usury-based economy, that is, they're moneylenders, which really did not exist until the late 17th century in the Western world, and still does not exist in Muslim countries. For a long time, both Catholic and Protestant religions forbid any form of usury. Usury means that you charge interest for a loan. Period. Well, what I have learned over time is that these moneylenders have produced all of the major wars of the past 2.5 centuries, from the French Revolution onward, for sure. You can see their hand at play, especially in the War of 1812 and the Civil War and so on.
Civil War, the Spanish-American War, where they made up the fact that the Cubans were supposed to have blown up the Maine, when in fact, excuse me, the Admiral Rickover investigation revealed that ammunition was exploded by coal in a corresponding bin. World War II with a Lusitania.
World War One.
World War I with a Lusitania was sent into the Atlantic, and she was attacked by German submarines, even after the Germans had already warned that they were going to attack any vessels steaming across the Atlantic. Yeah,
there was an enormous headline in one of the major New York dailies saying, a warning to passengers, do not board this ship. And something that not so many people know about is that Winston Churchill was Lord of the Admiralty at that time. And up to the time of the Lusitania entering waters in which they knew there was German U-boats, it was protected by British ships. Churchill called them off. Churchill called the British ships off so that the Lusitania would be easy prey for the U-boat. And then there's Pearl Harbor, of course. Pearl Harbor has become so notorious that it's part of the title of books about 9/11 itself, because there's volumes of evidence that the U.S. government knew in advance that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor.
The Australians reporting that a Japanese task force was steaming toward Pearl Harbor. Also, the United States really committed acts of war by blockading the Japanese and
they made it inevitable, the attack inevitable, and then concealed the approach of the fleet from people who were subsequently killed. And again, as in 9/11, more than 2,000 essentially innocent people, or wholly innocent people, died as a pretext to launch the United States military into a war that really just benefits those financiers, those few families who think that they deserve to rule the world. And that kind of comes back to New Orleans, because you see a lot of New World Order aspects of the situation there. It's kind of a microcosm of how they would treat all the world if they could. That is, those people who were left to die, really, outside the convention center or inside the Superdome, are evidence of the blatant cruelty of those families and their operatives, I think.
Wow, that is so profound, and it's something that I'm aware of, and the American people, for the most part, are not aware of these facts. They're believing what the media is putting out, and they're believing that our military is fighting for freedom and that we actually have freedom in this country. These same families, however, own the media.
Yeah. During World War I, in fact, they had a meeting in which they decided they should control the 16 major newspapers of the United States. And thereafter they did. So you will read next to nothing in the major media about an institution called the Federal Reserve System, which is the financier's major instrument for fleecing the public, controlling the nation. As incredible as it may sound to your listeners, the United States doesn't print its own money. It pays for its money to the Federal Reserve by way of issuing bonds instead of currency. And for that, the Federal Reserve charges interest. The Federal Reserve, which came into being in 1913 through the agency of allies of the Rothschild and Rockefeller families, also sets the interest rates every day, which are critical to, the amount of credit that will be available. So they control the money supply, they control the interest rates, which in turn controls the amount of credit that people can receive and the amount of business that can be done. So that is the means by which they favor themselves, but they have gotten so crazy and pathological, and they were crazy and pathological back at the time of September 11th, 2001 with this derivatives market. Even then, J.P. Morgan Chase owed $23 trillion in derivatives. Bank of America owned $10 trillion in derivatives. Citigroup owned $9 trillion in derivatives. The entire output of the world is $15 trillion a year. The budget of the United States only now is beginning to exceed $3 trillion a year. So you've got these three banks through their trade in this, I don't know how to describe it. The derivatives amount to people with control of enormous amounts of capital betting that they can accept a risk and then cover the risk. So that one company is exposed to a certain amount of liability, and J.P. Morgan says, okay, we'll assume responsibility for your liability, but we're going to leverage that asset at a ratio of about 30 to 41. So it'll show up on our books as 40 times more than its actual value, and that's what they get to count, and that's the way that they're able to give themselves $5 million bonuses at Goldman Sachs every year. But what's happened is all those things have stacked up so that their actual assets, which totaled, all the commercial banks in the United States in 2004 had $850 billion in assets, against no one really knows what the actual debt is by the institutions. The Bank of International Settlements, which is probably the key criminal institution in the world, and that's expect is the thing that they want to come in as the agency to sweep up the spoils from all this chaos they're creating. That institution estimated last year that the derivatives liabilities were $450 trillion plus.
So what we're talking about here is basically fake. I mean, they just made this up. The economy, the money value is all just made up.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
There's a very good quote from Sir Josiah Stamp, who was, I think at that time, head of the Bank of England, to an audience at the University of Texas in 1927. I wish I had it in front of me, but he really lays it out. I don't know what got into it. But he said, basically, if you want to remain slaves, just let the banks continue to issue your currency and set your interest rates. Because you can do anything you like. You can start a revolution, you can change the government, you can elect whomever you want. But so long as the financial institutions have that power, the very next day they're just going to start printing or not printing money, and choking or opening the money supply, and basically controlling society. So what appears to be happening now with these meltdowns and so forth is, I think, a planned crisis, a deliberate demolition, again, that may be getting out of control. But so far, due to the complete lack of exposure by major media, and despite the public being as much as 100 to 200 to 1 against it, the bailout, so forth, they've just rolled forward, and basically, as in an article that is published on puppetgov.com, says, against the theft of a nation, 5 steps for freedom and solvency, they've given up $1.2 trillion already, and it's open-ended. Right now, the credit windows are open at the Fed, and they're the most shocking of all things is that they're wide open to foreign central banks.
So foreign companies can own U.S. assets.
Well, not only that, they can come to a private consortium of banks that controls the U.S. money supply and say, we're the Deutsche Bank. We're having a hard time. We've got some of these derivatives too. We need these bets. We don't think we're going to be able to have our hunting party this Christmas unless you give us $7 trillion. All right, you do business in the United States. You're eligible.
So we're supporting foreign companies that are buying U.S. assets, but at the same time, these foreign entities are supporting businesses that take away U.S. jobs.
Well, there's all of that and that's another point that hits home hard in terms of people that had work no longer have work because the jobs have been outsourced to much cheaper and more compliant labor outside the United States. And that leads me to maybe the summation of what I would like to convey. And that is that for as long as the United States has existed, since 1783, since the winning of the Revolution, financiers within and without the United States have coveted the natural wealth of this country. And they feared the potentialities of an America that really was for the people. I mean, you and I know how wrong America has been, the true history of America. That America really is built on theft and slavery and
murder.
Exactly.
Blood.
All of that, despite all that, there's a promise here of a new world that actually is for its people, that takes care of resources and offers something to the world that has never been before. That's the vision of America that you could say, even though they were slaveholders, Thomas Jefferson and figures that meant a lot to me like Walt Whitman and William Blake and so on. That's their America. The financiers, largely based in Europe, have always wanted to control the United States by administering the money supply. There were two national banks instituted shortly after the United States came into being, and then the charter was rejected in 1811, largely through the efforts of Jefferson and John Adams. And then it was reinstituted after a war that the financiers kind of made happen, the War of 1812, because the nation was in debt due to the war. And Andrew Jackson was the president who finally put an end to that second bank that was 80% owned by foreign interests. And they tried again and again until they finally succeeded with the Federal Reserve System in 1913. But during that time, maybe the greatest example of an alternative is Abraham Lincoln issuing greenbacks in the middle of the Civil War after he'd gone to banks in New York and they'd said, yes, we'll give you money, but it'll be at 24 to 36% interest. And he said, well, I don't need you. I'm the government. I can print my own money. And he did. And the United States, despite that war, really accomplished more in those 4 years than it ever has or since. Really. So the first step that I think needs to be taken for our prosperity and freedom is to replace the Federal Reserve System with a national bank that issues currency for the public good. No more middlemen. Second thing is take over the commercial banks. They're supposedly worth $850 billion. We'll give them double that value, $1.7 trillion. But then we take them over, and they become not what they are. Not an institution that belongs to no one but profit. That they become something that serves the greater good.
Which is really what they're doing with it. It's like making up the money and making up the economy.
Yeah. Yeah, they're controlling us through the economy, and it's completely absurd.
So we, a national bank, where we are controlling our own money as opposed to these bankers controlling it. And hopefully that'll lead to a resource-based economy where everybody gets what they need as opposed to this interest and enslavement thing that we have going on now.
Right. Yeah. Many people have pointed out that the earth itself is phenomenally rich, and technology itself is endlessly enabling.
Potential, yes.
Yeah. So we can grow all the food we need. We can provide the means for communication such as never existed. We can actually have a new world that serves everyone when we remove the instruments of our enslavement.
And one of the things that I've observed is the fact that a lot of the problems we have now are generated because of poverty, people having scarcity.
Yeah.
Scarcity of money, scarcity of food, scarcity of homes or shelter.
Right.
So one of our primary objectives in our culture appears to be creating abundance. And again,
in our new culture.
Or allowing abundance to be held. And so that, again, goes back to your microcosm in New Orleans. What we have there is scarcity.
Yeah, and it's the most fecund place you can imagine. I mean, you can grow anything in New Orleans. You look over your shoulder and something is growing there.
Exactly. Yeah. So, did we cover all the major points you wanted to discuss about your book, about New Orleans? Is there anything else you want to convey to the public?
Just one last thing, and that is that to avoid the deliberate wrecking of the United States through chaos to its economy that is profiting only the creators of that chaos. The people who actually should be on trial right now for making the mess. Don't forget that Henry Paulson was CEO of Goldman Sachs between 2004 and 2006 and earned $37 million in 2005. He made the mess, and now he has usurped basically the legislative powers of the United States, and he holds the cards that he's dealing. And this is a completely insane situation. And the powers that the President of the United States has assumed by executive order and presidential directive, make it possible for martial law to be declared for any so-called emergency that he deems. And all this is happening at a time when people are suffering, but they're about to suffer a great deal more. And that's why they've got that brigade deployed here in the United States as of October 1st. So what we need to do is get out and make our awareness known and begin to contact all those people who should be serving society, and I mean police, I mean firefighters, I mean the military, and explain to them what the real situation is, that we're all being robbed. They're not going to be better off than we are. Their children certainly aren't going to be better off than we are. We are all meant to become a much diminished slave class. The elitists who portend this new world order have said many times that ideal population of the earth would be about 500 million people. Prince Philip of England said he would like to be reincarnated as a virus so he could help with depopulation. So that's the kind of mentality we're facing, and that's the alarm that I want to raise. The reason the United States is bogged in the Middle East and in Iraq, and that both presidential candidates are threatening to invade Iran, is to further bog the U.S. military and to take away the power of the United States to resist this takeover by a class that is intent on one world under them.
Simply amazing. It's like growing up, I watched these movies about the man and the government, and now I see it as a reality.
But it's so much bigger than we knew then. We didn't see the people behind the curtains, or we could only glimpse them. And now the one good thing about this crisis is that it's made dead clear to the public. You know, you have 100 to 1 people come. No, we don't want to bail out these criminals.
And it's done anyway.
Yeah.
So we have the internet. We have internet television. We've got public access TV, and we have ways of conveying our messages.
Yeah.
Please email this if you've received this by email or acquired it via Google Video to all of your constituents. We all have to work together in terms of taking control of our own media, and this is what the Citizens Internet Television Network is all about. We're about conveying the truth. We're about conveying the opinions of everyday people and extraordinary individuals like Don Paul here, who are taking leadership in the area of fighting for justice and peace. This is Walter Davis from the Citizens Internet Television Network, and Don, it's been a real pleasure interviewing you.
It was as good as I had hoped it would be.
And I just really wish you the best of success in the pursuit of your objectives. They're very noble, and I think that you deserve the respect, admiration, and support of people throughout many different communities, especially New Orleans and here in San Diego County. I hope you come back again, and then I'm able to interview you on internet TV and as well my public access television show.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing. Yeah, and I won't raise any of your personal biography, but you are a hero.
Thank you. Well, that makes me feel good. I try very hard. Again, this is Walter Davis with Don Paul and the Citizens Internet Television Network, and thank you very much for watching this.